Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, brothers and sisters. Welcome to another episode of Chai with my vibe. Today we've got the same old panel, Brother Stride, Saad and Imran.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
And obviously we're in the month of Ramadan, so there's no tea today. Not that we've had tea on most of the episodes before, when it wasn't Ramadan anyway. But today's topic, inshallah, is going to be on the issue of the upcoming election, voting, democracy, the whole shenanigan. Now, there's been a lot of talk, a lot of heated discussion, debates, controversy, both online and offline, in the Muslim arena and the non-Muslim arena. You know, we've got Theresa May, we've got Jeremy Corbyn, and all these parties and everything happening, and people are asking questions, right? People are asking, is the best for the Muslims? Some people are asking, is it permissible to vote in the first place? Which direction should we go? And yeah, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of questions being asked by the people, and a lot of opinions also being put out there. So we thought, inshallah, let's take you guys on a journey, because the thing is, it's true. A lot of people, there are many people out there watching this who believe right now that voting is haram, and democracy is kufr and it's haram. But the sad truth is, most of you don't know the reasons why you're saying that, and you don't know the evidences why you're saying that. Likewise, many people who say, no, voting is permissible, we have to vote. But the sad reality is, you guys don't know the evidences for that, nor do you know the evidences against that.
Not everyone, but
many,
a
lot of people, generally speaking, it's true, you wouldn't. If you went up to them and asked them, are you voting or not, they'll give you an answer. But if you ask them why, Islamically, why, they wouldn't be able to tell you.
Most will be like, this sheikh said, that sheikh said, but the evidence...
They wouldn't know themselves. So inshallah, hopefully we're going to take you guys on a journey, step by step, and hopefully, inshallah, by the end of this video, you guys should be upon a bit more clarity as to the reality of the matter. So first of all, what we're going to do is tell you guys the three main opinions that are out there at the moment. Number one being that it is permissible. Voting, generally speaking, is completely permissible. It's something from the religion. It originated in Islam. Democracy, voting, the whole shenanigan.
It's from Islam.
It's from Islam. It's an Islamic concept. It's an Islamic system, and it's permissible. Then there's the second view, which is that no, democracy and voting is not something from Islam. Furthermore, they go one step forward and said no, it's something which could potentially be kufr. But in a situation where it's the lesser of the two evils will come out from you participating in a vote, it's permissible only in that situation. Originally, it's haram.
That's the second view, right?
In this view, it becomes like a necessity kind of thing, where it's the lesser of two evils. In that situation, some scholars said it's permissible. Then you have some scholars who said no, it's completely impermissible. You can't vote, you can't elect, no matter what the situation, no matter what it is, you can't go for it at all. Inshallah, we're going to go through each and every single one. Then we're going to, and first of all, in order for us to understand, the ruling and why the scholar said this, why the scholar said this, first of all, we have to, as always, understand the picture. What is it that we're talking about? What is democracy? Because democracy isn't just, we're allowed to be naked and we're allowed to say whatever we want. No, it's not just that. There's a lot more to it, and hopefully, inshallah, we're going to paint a picture from the kuffar themselves, who are, the pioneers, especially of modern day democracy at least. So if everyone, if you want to go ahead, inshallah, take the floor and just paint a picture as to what democracy is, and hopefully, inshallah, I'm sure everyone will agree, because this is a well agreed upon definition.
Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. So, just to echo what Brother Abu Bakr said, it's imperative that we get a solid, grounded understanding of what democracy really is. Because the ulama, they will say, al-hukmu ala shay'in far'un an tasawwuri. And the ruling of a thing, the Islamic ruling upon a thing, is based on understanding what that thing really is. If you misunderstand what alcohol is, you'll make it halal. And if you misunderstand what it is, you could also make it, the ruling could change.
Exactly.
Do you see what I'm saying? So, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to spend a bit of time going through what this is. And as Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah said, this is one of the things that prevents people from falling into misguidance. So one of the main reasons people fell into misguidance is because they came to a conclusion before they had actually extracted their evidences.
They had a preconceived notion.
They had a preconceived notion, right? So they already believed democracy is kufr and voting is kufr. They believed it, and then they looked for evidences to reinforce that view. Or the other side, that believe voting is absolutely permissible, democracy is part of Islam. They believed that first, and then they went to the evidences and tried to find evidences to reinforce that view. Do you see? And that's why he said, يعتقدون, they believe something, ثم استدلون, then they try to find evidences to reinforce that which they believe. Now, of course, if I wear a particular, shade of sunglasses, right, I'm not going to be able to see the world for really what the color of the world is. I'm going to see it through the tint of my glasses. The same way, if I come to the Quran and I've already tinted my vision with this belief that democracy is permissible or that democracy is kufr, then I'm going to find evidences to reinforce that view. The same way, kuffar, when they come to the Quran, don't they find ayat and that they try to pull towards, their desires? For example, they want to show you that all Muslims are terrorists, and then all Muslims want to kill everyone, right? So they'll find ayat of Surah Al-Tawbah and Surah Al-Anfal, and look, you guys are like this, you guys are barbarians, without actually,
looking at the context, the rulings,
and everything.
Conditions of jihad, everything.
But what governs them is their preconceived notion. So it's good that we approach this as blank canvases, inshallah ta'ala, and we take it step by step, okay? Sure. None of us have any allegiance to any, particular political party, or we don't have any allegiance to any group or anything. We only have allegiance to Allah and His Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, Ahlul Sunnati wa Jama'ah. That's it, okay? We have no vested interest, no one's being paid here, nothing. We just want the haqq, okay? So let's take it step by step. And the first stage in understanding the hukum is understanding what democracy is. So very quickly, inshallah ta'ala, what is democracy? I actually studied law, guys, okay? Astaghfirullah. I always say that. People always ask me, why do you always say, astaghfirullah? At the end of this video, hopefully you know, inshallah ta'ala. But I actually, I studied law. And I always used to say to myself, it was a waste of time. What benefit did I ever get from studying law? And it was only when we actually came to doing this video and the research for this video that I realized, my law degree actually came in handy. Because one of the first modules that we studied in the first year was constitutional and administrative law. In there we actually understand, what the constitution of this, the democratic constitution of this country is. So it allowed me, alhamdulillah, to get a good understanding of what democracy really is, okay? And based on the works of Jonathan Locke and Thomas Hobbes in his book that's very well renowned, Leviathan, and by the way, these individuals were the forefathers. You know how like in America you have the forefathers of the American Republic, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin. The founding fathers, sorry. Here you also have the founding fathers of European democracy, European liberal democracy here in the UK. Do you see what I'm saying? And that's Jonathan Locke and Thomas Hobbes. Anyone who studied political theory, even social theory, legal theory, international relations, they'll be very familiar with these names. Even hatta you study philosophy, you know these names. Do you see what I'm saying? So what they basically say in a nutshell is that democracy has three usul. The same way Ahlul Sunnah has usul, right? Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah has usul that we study, in books of Aqidah, Sharh al-Sunnah by Imam al-Baghawi, Imam Ahmad, Usul al-Sunnah by Imam al-Humaydi. We study these principles, these usul. There are also usul of democracy. In other words, there are three pillars of democracy, three foundations upon which democracy runs. What are they? Number one, that the people select a executive. An executive is a body that enforces law.
Okay.
In other words, the Prime Minister. So the people select a Prime Minister. Good, number one. Number two, the people select a legislator. Someone to legislate. The Prime Minister is not the one who legislates necessarily. The President is not the one who legislates. The legislation takes place in the House of Commons, okay? So they select these MPs who are going to come together and they're going to, draft bills and whatnot, and they're going to make this legislation. That's the second thing. So there's someone to enforce the law, someone to create the law. And number three, the people themselves, through the judiciary, through the courts, interpret the law.
Okay.
So the people, in other words, are enforcing law that the people themselves created, that the people themselves interpreted. And there is a different branch for each one of these. These three branches together make up a liberal democratic government.
Okay.
So in other words, what we're trying to say is that it's man-made law. Enforced by man, interpreted by man, created by man.
Okay.
That's liberal democracy.
Okay.
Good.
Fantastic. So now we have an understanding of what democracy is. I'm sure everyone will agree. Mm-hmm. If anyone does disagree, feel free to comment below with what you believe democracy is. But obviously with some evidence from Locke and Hobbes.
Yeah, pay attention. The same way. Look, right here we have our kutub. Alhamdulillah, because we're going to talk about the Quran. So we have Ibn Jarir Tabari, Tafsir Ibn Kathir, Imam al-Qurtubi. These are men who who are authorities when it comes to explaining and understanding the Quran, it would be nonsensical for me or you to, as some strange people believe, pass fatwa from our own selves when, we're no one. We have to go to these men. The same way with democracy, I'm not going to go to Ibn Kathir and tell you what democracy is. I'm not going to go to Qurtubi and tell you what democracy is. I'm going to go to Jonathan Locke and I'm going to go to Thomas Hobbes. The founding fathers of this, the theoretical concepts that became liberal democracy that we see today.
Okay, so you mentioned Mr. Thomas Hobbes and Jonathan Locke. Now, I've got something here which I want to read to you guys. It's a couple of points that they brought forward.
These same individuals.
These same individuals who are the pioneers of democracy.
Modern day democracy.
Modern day democracy, yeah. They came with a few points. And I'm just going to read it to you guys, summarize it, and you guys can find this all online. So Hobbes and Locke elaborated that the significance, meaning and purpose of voting for rulers within this new materialist system, according to Hobbes and Locke and other Enlightenment thinkers, when people vote for a ruler or rulers, they are affirming the following. So the first one, you affirm your own supreme sovereignty. Now, some of you are going to be thinking, what on earth are you talking about? I don't believe I'm supreme. I don't believe I'm a sovereign. I don't believe I have any power. I'm just voting because I want Jeremy Corbyn. I'm just voting because I want Theresa May. Or I'm just voting because I want to leave Brexit or leave Britain. Sorry, leave the EU. Where on earth did you get that from? Now, obviously, they go on and explain it further down the line. But in order for you to delegate power, to give power to someone else to legislate on your behalf, that necessitates that you have that power in the first place. And that it might not be you as an individual, but collectively, all the voters together are the supreme sovereign.
So in other words, we would say in Arabic, this is al-Malik al-Mulk.
The supreme is like the top.
Yeah.
Okay.
The top dog.
Yeah, because in other words, it's the sovereign.
Yeah.
Yeah? And we study this in law. So what you're affirming, by casting a vote, you're saying, because you guys, sometimes the terminology and the jargon can go over your head, so painting a picture is a bit effective. So basically what Thomas Hobbes and Jonathan Locke are saying, you're going to vote for someone to represent you as a leader, and you're going to vote for someone to legislate for you. So that leader who's going to legislate for you has supreme power. But that power must have originated from you because you're the one who passed it on in the first place.
Exactly.
So you may not feel very powerful when you're just casting a vote, but democratically speaking, that is really what it is. Though that government would have never been there if it wasn't for you. You placed them there. So in other words, you as a person, as the people, if you were to translate supreme sovereign leader in Arabic, you would say Al-Malikul Mulk. Al-Malikul Mulk. Okay? Okay, good. Take it.
Second one, you declare the government's sole right to legislate as your delegated supreme sovereign. Now, obviously, because you've now given them this power to legislate, you've now delegated them the power to become the supreme sovereign. So they're not taking it.
So originally you were supreme,
but now you passed it on to them,
and they're supreme on your behalf.
And by you now doing so, number one, you affirm the government to be legitimate in form, basis, and purpose. You join your will together into the one national will that is solely represented and interpreted by the ruler, and you authorize all actions by the government, present and future. Now, that's a lot to take in. So, first of all, you affirm the government to be legitimate in form, basis, and purpose. If it wasn't legitimate, you wouldn't be participating in the system.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We're not saying, be careful here, we're not saying you endorse them. We're not saying you agree with them. We're not saying you necessarily believe everything they believe in. But you're giving them legitimacy
and authorization.
And you're also joining your will into the one national will. Because now if that leader now comes and says, look, we're leaving, Britain wants to leave the EU, you're now part of that. You've come under that because you're one of those people who voted. It also goes on to say, you declare the government's actions to be yours and on your behalf. And if you vote, you cannot have any moral legitimacy to complain. It expands upon that and says, look, due to the previous point, the people have no legal or moral right to complain about the ruler's actions, as the ruler's actions are their own. Therefore, you can't complain about something which you yourself are the author of. You yourself, it originated from within you.
Exactly. Yeah. He's a wakil for you. He's legislating on your behalf.
On your behalf. You know something that, look, I don't necessarily agree with everything the party says, but these things I agree with. Nah, like you've taken everything into consideration. This next point is very powerful because you agree to submit to whoever is the winner of the vote as your ruler. regardless of whether your preferred candidate wins or not. The fact that you've now participated in the system, you've agreed to whatever result the system comes out, you want it to be in your favour. But if it's not, you've agreed, okay, no problem, I'll submit to that, I'm happy with that.
Because that's the spirit of democracy. The people have their say. The people won. They got, for example, Theresa May. So she's your lead. You have to submit to her. You've authorised her to do whatever you want. She wants, even if she wasn't your preferred.
So that's exactly what it says. That the minority who lost, they participated in a system and thereby gave consent to abide by its conclusions.
SubhanAllah.
Therefore, the minority voters are also authors of all the actions of the ruler who represent all voters. Remember, the ruler, they don't just represent those who voted for them. They also represent you now, because you're now part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the last point is, they agree for the elected ruler to rule over you by their opinion, not yours. This is because the ruler, he's not obligated to implement that which the opinions of the people who voted for him. He can just say to them, yeah, look, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But there's no legal or moral obligation upon him to do that.
So in other words, he could just sell you dreams and do whatever he
And
wants.
come in, and you've got nothing to say against that. In essence, he says this means that election candidates want your vote, not your opinion.
Which is what is the reality.
That's the reality.
That's the reality. That's what
Politicians
happens,
today, they want your vote. If you look at, for example, like Donald Trump, for example, right? He mentioned, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that, and he got the votes because people. That's what a lot of people in America wanted. That I'm going to build walls, I'm going to ban the Muslims, I'm going to do this, all that. In reality, he couldn't go about and do that because there are things in place that prevent him from doing whatever the hell he wants. Otherwise, it will become a tyranny, not tyranny. What's it called?
Dictatorship.
A dictatorship.
Even, that time when they were promised, they're going to cut student loan fees and whatnot, and they got loads of votes from, the students. And then what happened? Sorry, we can't do it. And they started, going against what they were saying.
Now, this conclusion that he gives is something else. Honestly, listen to this, yeah? The principles of these 10 points formed what the political philosophy of secular liberalism, or liberalism just for short. Locke believed that this system would hinder the people from rebellion by making them believe they had some influence in government.
So you've been played, basically.
It's a mirage. It's all a fallacy. You're being made to believe that you're having an influence. You're being made to believe that you're making a change when in reality you're not. Okay, fine, maybe cool, 1-2 little sub-branches that you wanted, maybe cool, you got them. But in reality, the system's never going to, the system's always going to be there.
That's what people feed off so much. I'm making a change, my
I'm going to make a difference. And it's true, maybe you feel like,
And these are the forefathers.
And again, this isn't from Muslims, this isn't from us. This is from the people who created this system, who are the pioneers of this system. And the last point I want to read to you, he says, it is for this reason that politicians are desperate to get as many people to vote as possible, as voting is, listen to this, first and foremost, public consent for the continuation of the system and status quo.
Which means if you stop voting, then the system will crumble.
Yeah, it'll go.
If everyone doesn't vote, of course, but what he's saying is by you voting, you're giving consent for the system to carry on.
So if just explain to them. So really and truly, democracy, what it is that you have supreme authority, which you delegate to someone else, and you make him supreme sovereign over you to be legislating in your favour, but at the end of the day, he can do whatever he wants.
He can ignore everything that you say.
But even then, no, remember, he himself is restricted as well. Even if he might want to help you, there's certain things he can't do because of the constitution, because of the everything that's in place. So it's like it's one big mirage, but it makes you think.
It makes you think that there's.
It's like a shaitan,
what's it called? Ignorance is bliss.
It makes you feel like you're actually doing something.
When in reality, there's not a lot changing. Now,
it's exactly what a shaitan does, isn't it?
Yes.
He lures you in thinking that this is you can do something, and it's like right in front of your face. It's just waving, the little ticket in front of your face.
It's just like teasing you, basically.
Teasing,
There's
but
nothing there.
The reason why I really want to reiterate that last point, that taking part, participating, gives consent for the system to continue. That's what gives the system power. That's what it runs on.
The system that involves you being al-Malik al-Mulk.
Exactly. Now, obviously, going back to the first view that we're still talking about, within that view, it says that the individual said the only way to change the system, the only way to bring about change in the system is by engagement, is by participation.
That's what
the
some
system
Muslims believe, right?
Yeah, the system won't go away unless you participate. The system won't go away unless you engage. Whereas these guys who are the founding fathers who authored, constructed the system,
who want democracy to say, are telling you the way to basically, you know,
keep it going
is to carry on.
Yeah.
I remember that reminds me of, you know, what's that guy's name? Russell Brand.
Yeah.
And he tried to start a revolution where he was telling people not to vote because that would be the way that, you know, the whole system would, you know, get demolished and then new change could come about through something else, you know, and he was advocating for no one to vote.
He ended up voting.
Did he?
Yeah. You know,
oh yeah.
He brought the Labour guy in and was like, I actually feel like I can make change. Oh, this is so powerful. Anyone who kept up to date that would know. He was like,
in his own house.
Yeah, he was like, I did it because I thought I could have a voice, but because I realised it's sort of a mirage, exactly what you said. Well, look, now that we've got an understanding of what this is, I think now answering the question,
is Islam compatible with democracy?
It's going to be very easy. Well, how can it be? Allah is Al-Malik. Democracy necessitates. I mean, before we come up with any ayat or any ahadith or anything like that, every Muslim knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has 99 names. 100 minus 1. From Allah's name is Al-Malik. He's the supreme sovereign king. He's the supreme leader. Democracy necessitates that you yourself become the supreme sovereign and you transfer that supreme sovereignty from yourself to the government with the vote. So when you're voting, what you're really saying is, I'm in charge and I cast this vote, I'm giving you authority to be in charge on my behalf.
Even if you don't intend that, even if deep down that's not what you want, that is what you're doing by doing that.
Yeah,
that's a very powerful point. And this is, like I said, it's not coming from us, it's coming from the pioneers of democracy.
Right now, honestly, anyone who's got taqwa and a heart and iman and believes in Allah will say, I don't even need an ayah or hadith. I already know Allah's 99 names. This goes against Allah being Al-Qadir, all able. This goes against Him being Al-Malik, Al-Mulk. It goes against Him being the legislator, the judge, you know, etc. But anyway, let's go.
But obviously, alhamdulillah, we're Muslims and we're Ahlul Sunnah and
bring evidence.
We always go to the evidence.
No problem.
We always go to the Sunnah.
No problem.
We're going to do that, inshallah.
So, inshallah ta'ala, you know, we're not only going to give the evidence as you've requested, we're going to give the evidence with the understanding of the scholars, right? Because people,
as we always try to do.
We always do. I don't think there's ever been a time where we mentioned dalil, except that we always relied upon the understanding of ulama, and specifically those who are already dead, because they've already been saved from fitna and the ummah have agreed upon their nobility and their status. So we have to say Ibn Kathir, Tafsir Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, Tafsir al-Qurtubi, and so on and so forth. So, what is the evidences? When you go to Surah Al-Ma'idah, you find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has an ayah in which He said, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. In another ayah, Allah said, فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. In another ayah, He said, فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. Anyone who judges and legislates and rules and governs by other than what Allah sent down, meaning the law of Allah, then that person, Allah said, هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. Allah placed kufr on them. In another ayah, Allah said they are oppressors. In another ayah, Allah said they're fasiqun, outright rebellious people. Now, you know what's powerful when you understand this ayah? This ayah actually came down to the Yehud, okay?
The Jews.
That were in Medina. Why? Because they had changed and altered a legislation pertaining to the hukum, the ruling pertaining to the zani and the zaniya, the fornicator and the fornicatress.
Okay.
So they played, and Ibn Kathir, just refer back to the tafsir, it's all there for you. Based on them just doing istibdal, changing one ruling and then attributing that ruling to the Torah, right, which was the book that Allah had commanded them to govern by, just by them doing that, Allah placed takfir on them, okay? So, based upon that, just by changing one rule and attributing it to the religion and the sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can make a person be on the verges of kufr, if not fall into kufr, yeah? What about if you take an entire system? Here, the Jews, they had the Torah. They never took the whole Torah away and introduced a new system, right? They just took one or two things away. They just prayed with a few verses. And that was enough for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to place takfir on them, okay? Then we have many other verses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِنِ الْحُكْمُ إِلَّا لِلَّهِ. To Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone belongs the right to legislate. Allah said, أَلَا لَهُ الْخَلْقُ وَالْأَمْرُ. To Allah is the creation, and because He is the sole creator, to Him is the amr, to Him is the legislation. To Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Another ayah which is very powerful, Allah said, وَلَا يُشْرِكُ فِي حُكْمِهِ أَحَدًا. No one, Allah said, is shares with Allah. No one is a partner with Allah when it comes to legislation. Now, anyone who sniffed anything from usul al-fiqh would know something powerful happened in the verse. Allah said, He did a negation, right? He did a negation. There's a nafi in the ayah. Allah said, وَلَا يُشْرِكُوا فِي حُكْمِهِ أَحَدًا. So in this ayah you have a negation and you have a indefinite statement. Allah said, anyone, أَحَدًا. Okay? So when you have an indefinite, in other words a nakira, and it comes in the context of a negation, تفيد العموم, as Shaykh Abdul Rahman Nasir he said in this قواعد الفقهية, and we mentioned this book in the other show that we did, right? And in that poetry he said, وَالنَّكِرَةُ فِي سِيَاقِ النَّهِي تُعْطِي الْعُمُومَ أَوْ سِيَاقِ النَّفِي. He said that if you have an indefinite in the context of either a negation or a prohibition, then that benefits you generalization. Which what that means is that Allah, when He said وَلَا يُشْرِكُ فِي حُكْمِهِ أَحَدًا, that no one, anyone, whoever he may be, has a right to legislate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No matter what time you're in, what day you're in, what age you're in, what your situation is, who you are, where you're from, which part of the world you're from. No one. This is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does alone. I just want to mention one last evidence, inshallah ta'ala, because there's many. But this evidence directly, it really hits the nail on the head. And anyone who has any qualms pertaining to democracy, liberal democracy, secular democracy being permissible, at the end of the day, this ayah, you can't argue after it. This ayah is a game changer, okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when talking about the Ahlul Kitab, Allah said, اتَّخَذُوا أَحْبَارَهُم وَرُهْبَانَهُم أَرْبَابًا مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ, in Surah At-Tawbah, right? Allah said that they took their rabbis and their monks as gods. Pay attention. Allah is saying that Ahlul Kitab, the people of the book, they took their rabbis and their monks as gods. And it's interesting now, because anyone who's spoken to a Christian knows that a Christian took who as a God?
Jesus.
So Jesus, right? He's going to say Isa alayhi salam is my God, right? The Holy Spirit is my God. The Father is my God, right? They're going to say, I didn't worship my monk. We don't worship our rabbis, right? Now, there was a companion called Adi radiyallahu anhu who had the same question, because he used to be a Christian. He came to Islam after Christianity, and he knew his religion of Christianity. So when the Prophet ﷺ recited this ayah, he said, Ya Rasulullah, he said, إِنَّهُمْ لَمْ يَعْبُدُوهُمْ. Verily, they never worshipped them. They never worshipped their monks. They never worshipped their rabbis. Why? Because they worshipped who? They worshipped Jesus. And the Prophet ﷺ gave him a response and showed them exactly how they did worship their rabbis and their monks. The Prophet said, بَلَا, rather, إِنَّهُمْ حَرَّمُوا عَلَيْهِمُ الْحَلَالِ وَأَحَلُّوا لَهُمُ الْحَرَامِ فَاتَّبَعُوهُم فَذَلِكَ عِبَادَتُهُم. The Prophet ﷺ said to Adi, rather, your monks, your rabbis, your priests, did they not make halal what Allah made haram? Did they not make haram what Allah made halal? In other words, did they not change things around? For example, we know, Allah, even in the Torah, the Christians would accept that the swine is not permissible. But then they came and their rabbis and the rabbis are for the Jews. But the priests of the Christians, what do? They made alcohol and they made pig permissible. They said, no problem now. They said Peter had a dream, based on his dream, and they changed the law of Allah. So this is something very common. Allah mentions in the Quran, they would change things. We all know that they would make halal haram and haram halal.
I've got one big problem, yeah?
Okay.
What you just said right now.
Go for it.
You've used the hadith to explain an ayat.
Yes.
Who are you to explain an hadith and ayat?
Fantastic. Now, the Prophet ﷺ, when he explains the Quran, he explains it. There are two types of prophetic tafsir on the ayah. Sometimes the tafsir is clear, and sometimes it's indirect. Sometimes it's a direct tafsir, sometimes it's indirect tafsir. Here the Prophet gave you a direct tafsir. He mentioned this ayah, then he explained to you what it means. The reason why they worship their rabbis and their monks was because their rabbis and their monks legislated on their behalf. The Prophet clearly told you. The fact that Ibn Kathir himself brought it under this ayah is showing you that Ibn Kathir understood it like this. Okay. Not only that, Ibn Kathir goes on forward to then tell you scholars of this ummah, Sahaba who understood it like this. Not me. Ibn Kathir brings them. Where he says, Hudayfa radiyallahu anhu and Ibn Abbas وغيرهما, and other than these two, okay, and we all know Hudayfa ibn Yaman, great noble companion of the Prophet ﷺ, Abdullah ibn Abbas, great companion who explained the Quran, and the Prophet made dua for him to understand the Quran and to know its interpretations and its meaning. And what did they say in this ayah? They say, إِنَّهُمْ اتَّبَعُوهُم. That why did they worship their rabbis and their monks? Because they followed them. Followed them in what? They obeyed them in what? فِيمَا حَلَّلُوا وَحَرَّمُوا. They followed them and obeyed them in what they made halal and what they made haram. In other words, these monks and these rabbis ignored Allah's legislation, who just previously, when Allah said no one is allowed to change my legislation, no one is allowed to legislate on my behalf, they did. Okay, the fact that they did, and the people looked, the people here, you have to understand, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the people, following the ones who change the law. Not the ones who change the law. The ones who change the law, we already learned in the previous ayah. Allah said, وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. Okay, Allah places kufr on them. But here, we're finding that even the ones who followed them. So I'm saying, when you place this vote, what you're doing is you're giving the right to a human being to legislate on your behalf. They are going to make things halal which Allah made haram. They're going to make things haram which Allah made halal. Right? Now, by you voting, you're submitting, you're saying, this is me, I'm giving this to you. And I'm giving you authorization on my behalf to do this. Okay? I'm saying, are you not scared? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ is telling you this is the shirk and the kufr that the Ahlul Kitab came with when they followed their monks and their rabbis, and you're going to do this with your politicians?
And this isn't you, Darman, in the 14th century coming and saying this. This is Ibn Kathir brought Hudayfa bin al-Yaman.
14th Islamic century he means, by the way. But
Islamic century.
Yeah, Hudayfa ibn Abbas, Ibn Kathir. And the Prophet ﷺ himself, remember the Prophet, sometimes he gives a clear-cut explanation on direct ayah, and that's what the Prophet did.
Okay, so alhamdulillah, people know that we didn't interpret this ourselves. This is the scholars of the Sahaba, the best scholars of this ummah, explaining this ayah like this. So, are there any other ways that Islam and democracy contradict?
First and foremost, we have to understand something, and I think it should have been mentioned at the start. Was that the Sharia, it came as a way of life for us, right?
Yes.
We follow it, and this is our deen, okay? Now, democracy, it's a way of life of the people. They follow it, and they, abide their lives by these legislations that are put out in these laws, okay? So, in essence, the Sharia, Islam, is a religion for us. And in essence, democracy is a religion for these people, right? So now what we need to understand is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Surah Al-Imran verse 85. He said, and whosoever seeks a religion other than Islam, it will never be accepted of him, and in the hereafter he will be one of the losers. So what we need to understand right now is we have the Sharia, the laws and legislations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislated. And we have democracy, the laws and legislations that were legislated by the people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, if you go elsewhere other than Islam, that is not going to be accepted from you. Not only is it not going to be accepted from you, but what? He said you're going to be from one of those who are the losers on the Day of Judgment. SubhanAllah, that should scare a person. You know what I'm saying? And also, even from that, we have so many more evidences. Like the brother was mentioning, Imran, he was mentioning, there's evidences upon evidences in the Quran. A person who goes to the Quran and actually understands the Quran, right? Understands the Arabic language and misses this, it's ajib wallahi, because the evidences are there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, we have established for you a code of conduct, i.e. the religion. Sharia. Follow it and do not follow the desires of the ignorant people. Now, we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all-knowing, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what's happened, what is happening, and what will happen. So therefore, Allah can make the most wisest and the most knowledgeable of legislations, because Allah knows, right?
Even that which, if it was to happen, how
it
would
happen. Exactly. But the person who's now making the democratic legislations and putting these legislations in place is a human being, right? And the human being is limited in their perception of things. They only have limited knowledge. Rather, the human being is a jahil, right? So now, if you're going to come and say that you're going to follow something, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, do not follow those who are ignorant, the desires of the ignorant people, i.e. this democracy, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, and this is what is powerful, and subhanallah, not from my explanation, I'm going to bring inshallah the scholars. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Hud, do not lean, focus on this word, do not lean towards those who have transgressed, lest you incur hell and find no allies to help you against Allah, and then end up losers. Now Abu Aliya, great scholar of our religion, student of Ibn Abbas, Ibn Mas'ud and the likes, he said when it came to this, do not lean, the word lean, right? He said, do not be pleased with it.
SubhanAllah.
Do not be pleased with it. Wallahi, these ayat, they're not just coming out of, you know, anywhere. They came because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew this was going to take place. And, you know, the Quran, it is a way of life for us. Every single solution to our daily problems, we find it in the Quran. And here we've just given you some evidences. Some.
Wallahi, that word some means some. There's so many more on this very issue, so many more.
I think is the word used was lean.
Lean, exactly.
Lean. It's not even
Like
Imran
Imran mentioned before when he was talking about just some of the legislations they took, you know, they changed. It's just lean. Imagine now you're fully submitting. Submission is fully, right? Now, the ayah is saying just lean.
If I will touch you.
Can I just add, because Strides actually mentioned something very, very important. Because he said that, like in the Quran, the legislation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has answers for everything for us. Okay, one of the reasons why the people are going through this other means in order for, you know, to vote is because they're hoping through the voting it would allow things to get better for Muslims, and it would allow good to come out from it, you know, and hopefully that would be a stepping stone to coming into the legislation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us already in the Quran, فَإِن تَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ فَرُدُّوهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. Okay? If you dispute in anything, right, any problems that occur in anything in the religion, right, or in your dunya, right, bring it back to who? To Allah and His Messenger, right? And if you go to the tafsir of, you know, Imam al-Baghawi or Shaykh Abdul Rahman ibn Nasir al-Sa'di, and they mention what does it mean to take it back to Allah and His Messenger, meaning to take it back to the Quran and the Sunnah. But it's something interesting. It's the principle that you mentioned earlier, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَإِن تَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ. Now, this is another principle you mentioned, that when you have a negation, right, in indefinite in the form of a negation, it shows generalization. Also, if you have a condition, okay, a condition, and you have it indefinite in a context of a condition, that also shows a generalization. So, fi shay'in, and anything that you have, any problem, any issues that you have ever in your life, whether it's dunya related, whether it's religious related, bring it back to Allah and His Messenger. Meaning, Allah and His Messenger, they have a solution for us. So they want to take this path in order to form solutions for the Muslims. You're not going to find it. You have to go to the Kitab and the Sunnah, the legislation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in order to solve the problems that we have.
Okay. Now, going back to that first view, we're still on the first view here, right? Someone might come now and say, okay, fine, you're saying go back to the Sharia, go back to this. I'm saying this is from the Sharia. I'm saying democracy is from Islam. Someone might come and say, look, as someone has, that look, there's an ayah in the Quran, you know, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَ بَيْنَهُمْ. This ayah is referring to democracy. Shura in this ayah is democracy. The closest translation for the word shura, the concept shura, is democracy, is the democratic system that we have. Now, what is shura? First of all, that's something which we need to understand, right? And to put it down in the dumbest way possible, is that it's just people come together to consult one another with regards to an affair, to come to a decision upon a matter. Now, is democracy not the people consulting one another, coming together to come to a decision with regards to an affair, which in democracy specifically we're talking about who's going to lead, or, you know, which laws are going to be passed. Either they're going to choose a leader or they're going to choose the new laws. I'm saying that's shura, no? Consultation, decision. Why is that view not something which the scholars have spoken about, or have they? Do any of the tafsirs mention that?
So to answer your question, Akhi, number one, you have to know, it's very, very important, okay? For anyone to come out here and claim, right? And like you mentioned the ayah, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَ بَيْنَهُمْ, okay? So we know shura is something which is from the religion, okay? Now, in order for a person to come out here and say that democracy is shura, that person needs evidence. Okay, he can't just come out and claim and say that, you know, shura, democracy, is that. We need to know, where did you get it from? Whose explanation?
Just like I did with him, I asked him
exactly.
Whose explanation.
Every ayah that he came with an explanation of someone to precede him, a salaf, okay, an alim, a sahabi, or even the messenger alayhi salatu wasallam to precede him. So it's not up to us to even go out of our way to say that and give evidence to prove that shura is not democracy. The person that's claiming that, because it's something to do with the religion, he has to come with evidence. But regardless, okay, we know that no, shura and democracy are two completely different things, okay? And like you mentioned, shura basically means consultation, right? And the ayah which was used is the ayah in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَالَّذِينَ اسْتَجَابُوا لِرَبِّهِمْ وَأَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَمَرُوهُمْ شُورَ بَيْنَهُم, okay? Now, Imam al-Qurtubi, I have this tafsir here, okay? Imam al-Qurtubi, again, for those of you that don't know,
Good to know.
get to know,
You say
right?
that about everyone. In
About
every
everybody.
episode.
Because
What do you want me to say?
what do you want me
Talking
to
about we're gonna take it out.
these are basic people. These are like people that every Muslim should know. You know, if you're studying the religion at least. If you're a person that's actively studying the religion, and you're an alim, you're a scholar, or you're a student of knowledge, these names should be clear cut to you.
We should get a T-shirt when they just say, if you don't know, get to know.
Like, we shouldn't have to go out of it.
Get a
But-
probe that says that.
He has one of the greatest, if not one of the greatest, but the greatest tafsir when it comes to the ahkam in the Quran.
Rulings.
Okay,
Islamic
rulings.
law, basically.
Islamic law.
When it comes to taking Islamic law from the Quran,
Imam al-Qurtubi, the guy.
Okay. Now he mentions, right, in regards to shura, okay, the consultation that was taking place. Okay, and he mentioned this ayah. It was actually referring to the elite people from Ansar, okay, from Medina, right, that came to the Prophet ﷺ, right. It's referring to them. It was 12 of them specifically. Okay, these people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, between them, amruhum shura bainahum, between them do consultation, right? But what kind of consultation was this? Because we know democracy is consultation which is done in order for legislative rules to come about, okay, in order to bring new rulings into the government. Imam al-Qurtubi, he mentions, he said that the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, he used to do shura with his companions, okay, and he would take their opinions in regards to situations, things like war. Okay, so when they would go to battles in regards to what tactics to use, what strategies, who should be at the front, who should be at the back, and, you know, how to take care of people when they're wounded, these kind of things, right? This is what the Prophet ﷺ would do shura with the companions, right? And he said that there are many athar from the Salaf, many textual narrations that have come to us from the Salaf in regards to this. But he said, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ يُشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَحْكَامِ. But he said he would never consult with them in regards to ahkam, in regards to legislative rulings.
Subhanallah.
Why? Because whilst the Prophet ﷺ was there, Allah was revealing ayat. Legislative rulings were already coming down from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah was legislating.
So shura was never in legislation.
Of course not. It was never in consultation to bring about new legislative rules, because Allah was always revealing ayat at that time. So he said that the Prophet would never do that. When you look at democracy, what are they doing? They're consulting in order to bring about new laws. So for a person to come about and now say that democracy and shura are both the same thing, well, like...
So Imam al-Qurtubi, for lack of a better term, he's saying there's no shura in issues of legislation, which, let's be honest, democracy, if you were ever to bring shura, which you can't, but if you were ever to try, it would be shura in terms of legislation. So Imam al-Qurtubi is saying no democracy, and this individual is saying no, this is democracy.
So look, when it comes to shura, there are when it comes to like, you know, coming up with rules and whatnot, you know, there is a scope that like an Islamic leader who rules by the Quran and Sunnah has. For example, you know, like the Quran never mentioned things like, you know, like traffic lights and, you know, rules pertaining to, you know, the highway code, or, you know, like things. Do you see what I'm saying? Like things that are like small, like very minor issues, like, you know, laws pertaining to you know, street lights and things like. So you can do shura and based on that, you know, one has the scope, right, to basically, you know, do shura and come up with rules.
And even then, the ruler, generally speaking, he does shura with who?
With the we'll come to that in a second.
But see, exactly what you're mentioning, exactly what Imam al-Qurtubi mentioned as well, because he said when the Sahabas, what they would do is يَسْتَنْبِطُونَها مِنْ كِتَابِ وَالسُّنَّةِ.
Exactly.
Istinbat.
They would derive rulings, right, in regards to new things that would come about, okay? But they wouldn't bring new ayat, new legislations. No, they wouldn't do that. They would use the legislation which is already there.
Exactly. So basically, in other words, the Quran and Sunnah, they would look at what the Quran and Sunnah says. The Quran and Sunnah would give them a scope. They would maneuver within the scope that the text has given to them, constantly referring back to the Quranic ayat, not escaping the scope. Like, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not prohibited us from having speed cameras, right?
Okay.
This is within the scope of what Allah has made permissible for us. So within that scope, they have room to maneuver.
As long as
right?
they're going back to the Quran
It's
and the
a-
Sunnah.
And they're
it's a
basing it on the
sub-branch,
Quran and
isn't it?
Sunnah.
How do you
Sub
know-
branch is taking it back to the
Yeah.
How do you know they
comprehensive.
don't use the Quran and Sunnah in the House of Commons?
Jonathan Locke and Thomas Hobbes just told us they're not. They said they just told us they're not, right? So that's the thing. The Sahaba, when they did Shura, the Quran and Sunnah was there. They placed it in the middle. They said, okay, this ayah says this. Based on this ayah, what room do we have to maneuver? Is there? Can we do X? Can we pass street? Can we set up street lights and have rules pertaining to street lights? Is there anything in the Quran and Sunnah that says no? You can't have street lights.
So the
They would
Shura
take a
was
step
always
back.
based on
Exactly.
fact.
But then they say, hold on. Can we have like nightclubs and people running around in miniskirts? And can we pass laws where we make cocaine, A class and make weed a D class and weed can become, legalized, whatever? They're going to say, wait. Does weed intoxicate? Okay, the Quran and Sunnah prohibits intoxicants. Do you see? So to conflate the two is a joke, akhi. Just before we move on, I think it's really important for people to pick out something. Yeah, people who push these things like democracy and whatnot. Yeah, Muslims who do this. Yeah, they always say be academic. You're not being very academic. You're quoting these ancient scholars and whatnot. Why don't you be academic? What they really mean by that, number one, is that put the Quran and Sunnah to the side. Use your logic, use philosophy and sociology. Really put the text to the side, which is something that is absolutely wrong in the Quran and Sunnah govern us. But even let's just say, okay, let's be academic. You guys claim academia, you feign it, but you're not being very academic, are you? Look at this argument that they just took, that Shura and democracy is the same. What's their argument? They clearly say because in Shura people come together to make decisions, in democracy people come together to make decisions, which is right. They both share this, right? But just because they both share a commonality, it does not now logically follow that the both of them are the exact same thing because they have this commonality. This, if anyone studies logic, is known as the fallacy of the undistributed middle. What this means is that you have fallaciously come to a conclusion and given two things the same ruling, the same hukum, just because they share something, that even though they're two different things. For example, if I have a dog, and my dog, it takes oxygen, and I have a friend who also takes oxygen, because they both share this commonality, is it now correct for me to say that this dog and this friend are the same being?
No.
That my dog is my friend? Right?
Mm.
That my friend is my dog? Is it correct for me to say that? It doesn't logically follow. Just because they share that commonality in the middle. And they're committing this exact same fallacy right here. So not only don't they have the shara with them, they don't have the aql with them either.
It's like, for example, student loan, an investment. There's money being put in, money being paid back.
Yeah.
All to the same. But without looking at
Exactly.
the reality of the
They play.
situation.
In other words, they're playing with words, and this is one of the biggest tricks of Shaitan. When he came to Adam and Hawa salamun alayha, Allah told him not to go to this tree. It's a forbidden tree. But what did Shaitan say? Shajaratul khuld. It's the tree of eternity. He changed the name,
Yeah.
and this is what Shaitan does. Fornication is a sin. He called it making love. Do you see what I'm saying?
Because they can't change the legislation, so they change the reality.
They change the reality.
Yeah.
Okay.
But inshallah ta'ala.
Okay, so again, I've got another question. Actually, you mentioned what Imam al-Qurtubi had to say with regards to this ayah. Now, you also checked the Tafsir ibn Kathir, the Tafsir of Ibn Taymiyyah, rahmahullah ta'ala, Tafsir al-Sahih, Tafsir of Imam al-Baghawi, Tafsir of Imam al-Tabari. You checked the Tafsir of Muhammad Amin al-Shaqiqi, or was it Sheikh Nasir al-Sa'di?
Sheikh Abdurrahman Nasir al-Sa'di.
Okay, okay, maybe Imam al-Qurtubi did bring that Shura is democracy, and which of the others did?
None of them.
None of them.
Akhi, that's
Oh,
not
no,
even-
No. Look, you think about it like this, right? Democracy is something which came about around about 2-3 centuries ago, right?
The
The modern
modern day
democracy,
one, yeah.
the modern form of democracy that we know, right? Why would that be mentioned in any tafsir?
It depends. There's two views. Either modern day democracy came around in the 1700s, and classical
French
democracy
Revolution.
came
Yeah,
around at the time of
Plato and
Socrates,
Socrates.
at the time of the Greeks. So either it came before Islam or came after Islam. The point is,
But
it
it
missed
didn't-
Islam from the front and the back.
It didn't come from Islam.
Okay, 1 second. So, okay, maybe because in which the closest translation of the word shura is democracy. So maybe it won't be in the books of tafsir. Maybe it's in the dictionaries. Now, I know you checked the Arabic dictionaries also, right?
Okay, well,
How many
I
of them
checked.
said that it's a democracy?
Okay, well, I checked. I checked. I have dictionaries here on my side. I've got this dictionary here as well. This dictionary specifically is called Mufradat wa Alfad al-Quran. Okay, it's a dictionary which was done by Ar-Raghib al-Asfahani or Asfahani, whichever way you like to say it, right? Where he took words from the Quran and explained them, what these words mean. So it's specific from the Quran. I went for
And it's classic.
It's a classical text. I went into it, I looked at the word shura, I looked at its root letters, I looked at the meaning, he brought the ayahs, and do you know what he said? He said shura is just consultation. Okay?
Not legislation.
He didn't say legislation. He said it's just consultation. Just consulting somebody on issues. That's it. Nothing to do with democracy, nothing to do with legislations, none of that.
Can I mention something as well? You posed the question to the brothers, what scholars said this. Rather, I'd like to pose the question to any individual that comes out and says it, where on earth did you get it from? Because you're making, like Brother Saad mentioned, if you're making the claim that this is that, then it is upon you to show us how this is that. Show us where you extracted that from, who before you preceded you in saying this, because it's not fair to us and it's not fair to the people that you come out and you say a statement and this statement has no dalil to it, no evidence to it, because there's a statement that I want to share with you, inshallah, and it's a hadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu narrated this. And he said, indeed, a man may utter a statement that he does not see any harm in. So maybe you uttered this statement, you think it wouldn't cause any harm, but for which he will fall 70 autumns in the fire, in the hell. So you need to understand, and everyone needs to understand, even us, when we're bringing statements about, we cannot just dish out statements like it's, what they would say, happy days. We have to back that statement up with evidence. Because without the evidence, it's just merely a claim which has no weight.
Okay, so clearly no one has come before and said that democracy is shura. But now there's another point that this same view holds, and the same individual brought. That, okay, let's put democracy and shura to the side. What about elections and shura? So the election is just selection. You're just selecting a leader. And selection, as we know in Islam, selection itself is permissible. I can select this book or that book. I can select I want this drink or that drink. Selection is permissible. The original essence of it is that it's permissible. You need to bring in evidence to say that it's not permissible.
They're going to say Sahaba selected.
Yeah, Sahaba selected different people. Like for example, they'll bring the narration that when Umar radiallahu anhu wanted to pass on the Khalifa and he wanted someone to become the next. He wanted to choose the next Khalifa. He appointed 6 of the 10 promised Jannah who were still alive at that time, for them to choose and come up with a leader amongst themselves, right? From amongst themselves. And I believe his son Ibn Umar was also part of that, but he wasn't allowed to be from the leader, the one chosen, right? Yeah. So look, they elected, they came around, they voted. In fact, some of the narrations mentioned that Abdurrahman ibn Auf radiallahu anhu, he went out and he did a general election. Or he says not a general election, he did it for everyone, he did an election amongst the people. Like he consulted the people, chose the people, chose their leader. This is election, selection, it's all the same.
Okay. Question number 1. Aina dalil? Where's the evidence?
There's a hadith of Abdurrahman ibn Auf.
No, give us this is the whole point, right? Whenever we give statements, it is not fair, okay? Look, we get accused a lot of the times that when we say things, we say it from our own back pockets. Now, we don't go to the Salaf, we don't go to the scholars, we don't bring ahadith, we don't bring ayat, we don't bring explanations for it. These people are bringing statements and they have no evidence. They're not telling us where did they get the evidence from. I can come up to you and say, oh, the Prophet did this.
But when you say everything is understanding.
Not even who understand, but where did you get it from? Like I could just come up and literally just make up a hadith, and a person would believe me. Why? Because I have a beard and because I teach Arabic and I talk about Islam. It's not fair for a person to do that to the people. You have to bring. But regardless,
and you know what's just on that point that you mentioned a very powerful point that, and back in the days that used to be very prevalent, especially for example in Pakistani countries. Like Mulanas would come and they'd be in a village. People got no internet access. They got no books, nothing to read. They'll come and say, "Look, you have to do this. You have to do this. This one's done. If you come to me, I will give you kids. If you come to me, it's written in the Quran. Love the awliya, give the awliya your paise, and we'll give you things." This is what people were taught, and people believed it. People would come with their own perceptions, right? But nowadays, people are becoming more streetwise, or rather, becoming more religious-wise.
You've got Sunnah.com.
Because you've got Sunnah.com, you can check the Bukhari, like, what, is this authentic? Is it not authentic?
All the translations are correct.
Yeah, you've got videos of the ulama, on there, you've got, like access online to Islamic information. So now if someone comes to you and says, look, if you kiss my feet, you'll enter Jannah. So, let me see, does anything written? So where did you come up with that? Oh, it's in the Quran. Okay, which ayah? So let me check the Quran. Oh, it's not here. Which hadith book? Oh, this book. No, it's not here either. People can do that now. So what people have started doing now is rather than giving a new perception, rather than giving a new opinion, because you know people are going to reject it. Who preceded you in this? They started to try and change the reality. So, like for example, no one's going to come now and say to you, "Look, akhi, riba is halal." No one's going to say that. But someone might come and say, "Look, if you get a house on a mortgage, it's not riba." I'm not saying riba is halal. I'm saying the reality is that it's not riba.
They can't change the hukum. They can't change the text because they know you've got access to it.
Because they know that that's there.
They can't change the
But they will
legislation.
change. They'll try and change the way the reality of the situation is and say, "Look, it's just scanning."
You know, I was going to mention, yeah, like I don't think the people actually understand what like was just discussed, the importance of verifying news when it comes to you, you know, because a lot of the time, you know, our parents, they just took, like you mentioned, that which was said, and we don't want it to go down to our generation, you know, where you're just getting fed something and you just take it at its, you know, face value, exactly, you know, because our religion doesn't teach us this. Our religion teaches us to know where it's come from. Is it authentic? What's the chain? And, you know, so on and so forth. And that's why the brothers have been mentioning so much about principles. This is another principle. And if
it's
people,
not just general specific. There's
exactly. And if people actually went out of their way to understand these foundational principles of our religion, there would be less confusion in this, you know, in this ummah. But unfortunately, it hasn't.
Okay, so
before he goes and answers it, I also just want to add, because don't worry, I don't want anyone to think we're shying away from the answer. He's going to answer the question about the voting and the election in Shura in a second, and Abdurrahman ibn Auf, he's going to do that. Don't worry, he's coming to that. But this is another example of them committing the fallacy of the undistributed middle. Voting, general election has selection. The Sahaba radiallahu anhum selected a leader. Therefore, Sahaba the general election. Do you see? This again, coming back to what you said, they're changing the reality. Remember, people, they understand reality based on names, so they play with words. That's what they always do. They just change the word.
I guess another way you could put it, right, is like this. You could say, look, alcohol is a type of drink, is a drink, right? If someone comes and says alcohol is haram, a specific type of drink, they're not saying drinks are haram.
Exactly.
Alcohol is a type of drink.
Even though drinks like milk and alcohol share something, that they're a drink.
They're a drink. But the alcohol, we're saying alcohol is haram, not drinks in general. Likewise, when someone now comes and says, look, voting, election is haram, because
general
election is a type of selection,
but
you're selecting a leader who's going to legislate on your behalf. This is a specific type of selection. We're not saying selection is haram. You can select whatever you want. You can select this book, that book, which drink you want, which you know, whatever you want, as long as it's obviously in line with the Sharia. Selection, no one's saying selection is impermissible. No one is saying that. But this specific type, which is election, we're saying that. Rather, we are not saying that. The ulama have said that, and we're going to come to those details later on. So again, so Abdurrahman ibn Auf, coming back to that point, he consulted the 6 Sahaba, right? Umar radiallahu anhu, he, you know, authorized this himself. And as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us, فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالسُنَّةِ, upon you is my sunnah, وَالسُنَّةِ الْخُلَفَاءِ الرَّاشِدِينَ وَالْمَهْدِينَ, and the sunnah of the rightly guided Khalifas, so Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali radiallahu anhum ajma'in. So, and then the Prophet even went one step further and said, عَدُّ عَلَيْهَا بِالنَّوَاجِذ, hold on to it with your molar teeth. The Prophet didn't say hold on to them, my sunnah and their sunnah with your molar. He said it. The Prophet's sunnah and those 4 companions and the Sahaba, their sunnah is one. Because they didn't walk the same path. The Sahaba did what the Prophet did and the Prophet did what the Sahaba did. So, my question to you now is, we have Umar radiallahu anhu conducting a election. So, how is election different from... Jeremy Corbyn, he's going to do it. For example, with Barack Obama, it's a clear example. The Muslims in America were acting like he's the Mahdi. Likewise, when it says voting and the democracy is Islamic, it's permissible. It's even become obligatory now because of these issues. You can't back that view. And the sad thing is, most people don't even know that this individual holds this view. Like, they're out here saying, no, guys, he believes that voting is haram. We all agree, no one disputes. Voting is haram, voting is bad. But it's the lesser of 2 evils.
Even his closest companions.
I say, no, that's not what he believes. Watch his videos. That
to show how absurd.
By the way.
So the people of elections, they are the enemies of these sheikhs. And these people that are coming and backing, oh yeah, but Sheikh Al-Albani said, you did not talk to Sheikh Al-Albani, okay? You did not contact him. You do not have his phone number, okay? The Sheikh right here called Sheikh Al-Albani. I just need to make that
Yeah,
clear.
Also that you can access it absolutely free.